Immigration's been a political flashpoint for decades now. It's one of the most complex issues that our nation faces today as we try to grapple with all of the geopolitical, economic, and social factors at play. For the last three elections, Donald Trump has made villainizing immigrants central to his campaign message. His two major promises on immigration are to build a wall and to carry out the largest deportation operation in the history of the country. Now, it comes as no shock that Project 2025's immigration policy also echoes Trump's promises. The far-right manifesto puts forth sealing the border, and it seeks to do so with military force. Let's turn to page 166, chapter 5. It wants the Department of Defense to, quote, assist in aggressively building the border wall system on America's southern border, including using military personnel and hardware to prevent illegal crossings between ports of entry and channel all cross-border traffic to legal ports of entry. Okay. But Project 2025 goes much, much farther than that. People can agree that you should be able to control your border. But not only does Project 2025 aim to close the border and to militarize the border, it aims to use every lever of government to find, detain, and deport undocumented people, going so far as to take funding and housing away from people who are just associated with undocumented immigrants. Look at this recommendation. It's to the Department of Education on page 167. It wants the Department of Education to, quote, deny loan assistance to those who are not U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents and deny loan access to students at schools that provide in-state tuition to illegal aliens. We don't use that word. That's their language. But let me just tell you, this is crazy. Project 2025 wants to take away student loan eligibility for students with legal status or who might be American citizens who simply attend a school that might confer financial and tuition benefits upon undocumented immigrants. There's more. Project 2025 wants to bar U.S. citizens from qualifying for federal housing if they live with anyone who is not a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident, specifically calling out mixed status families. It wants to force states to share driver's licenses and taxpayer identification information with federal authorities in order to find undocumented individuals and threaten to revoke critical funding to states that don't comply. It wants to use data from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, data to enforce immigration control. I mean, think about that. You're an undocumented immigrant and a hurricane comes your way. You go to FEMA to get temporary housing, and then you get swept up into the federal immigration system. Data that is supposed to be used for major disasters. It wants to bring back child and family detention and increase the national capacity for those detention centers. I could go on, but Project 2025 doesn't just go after undocumented people or illegal immigration. It would actually even severely limit legal immigration, which we know to be an imperative in this country, an economic imperative. It would effectively terminate the legal status of 500,000 dreamers. The percentage of Americans who think dreamers should have legal status in this country is way above 80%. But Project 2025 would take status away from dreamers. It would use the existing backlog of cases to suspend most legal immigration. It would limit the number of H-2A and H-2B temporary worker visas. That would cause critical gaps in the agricultural industry, the construction industry, the hospitality sector, and the forestry sector. It would even reduce the number of H-1B highly skilled worker visas. Ask your doctor, if you've got a doctor who's not from America, what kind of visa they're on. It's probably an H-1B. It would significantly limit the number of T and U visas. You probably don't know what those are, but they're the visas that are given to victims of human trafficking, violence, and abuse. Human trafficking, violence, and abuse. We're targeting them too. Let's remember the context here. Trump and the Republican Party have for a decade now made the amorphous threat of immigrants a central rallying point. Trump constantly accuses Democrats of having reckless, dangerous, open border policies which let in immigrants which Trump calls vermin, who in Trump's words poison the blood of our country. But remember, Donald Trump loyalists in Congress killed the modern era's strongest effort at border control. Project 2025's immigration proposals are not going to fix anything at all. It simply lays out all these plans to reduce legal and illegal pathways into the United States, to slow down our already incredibly backlogged immigration system, to weaponize every branch of the government to round up millions of people, some of whom have been here for most of their lives and who collectively we rely upon for our economic growth and in many of our most critical industries. Let's be really clear. Project 2025's immigration policies aren't even trying to fix anything. They break what is already a broken system by using tactics that are punctuated by cruelty. But that's the point. When the rhetorical strategy of fear-mongering of our broken system has worked for you, fixing the problem is not going to be your objective. Cruelty, when it comes to immigration, is the point. Cruelty has always been the point. Our coverage of Project 2025 continues and will continue. I told you before the break about Project 2025's cruelty-forward plan to seal the southern border, to carry out mass deportation operations, to weaponize almost every branch of the government in order to do so. For more on this, I'm joined by the award-winning journalist Paula Ramos. She is an MSNBC contributor. She's a former deputy national director of Hispanic media for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. She's the author of the important upcoming book, Defectors, The Rise of the Latino Far Right and What It Means for America. Comes out next month, and we're going to have her back to talk about that very specifically. Paula, migration, whether it's forced or voluntary, is the human condition. There's perhaps no greater description of what happens. We all know, and you know very specifically because you've spent time at the southern border, we know there's an issue. We know there's got to be a better way. And some of that's on our side and some of that's on the border side. Nothing in here solves literally anything that's going on.
No, not at all. In fact, it's not a policy proposal. There's no fact-based solutions. It is all based on this idea of what they have to do to widen America, right? And so I think it's important to take a step back and to understand who penned the immigration section.
Right.
Right. Let's go back to the name Ken Cuccinelli.
Yep.
Ken Cuccinelli, everyone may remember, former Trump administration official, top figure in the Homeland Security Department. He is the person that genuinely believes in ending birthright citizenship. Right. He is also the person that in 2019 tried to literally rewrite the Statue of Liberty poem. And I mention it because it goes to the heart of what we're seeing in those words. In 2019, he essentially inferred that these words, "Give me your poor and you're tired," that those words were specifically referring to European immigrants, right? To white people, to people that could only come to this country if you had privilege, if you had access and money. Right. Not talking about black and brown immigrants. And the man that penned the immigration section is also the one that you mentioned pushed forward the public charge rule, essentially prohibiting legal immigrants, not undocumented immigrants, but legal immigrants from accessing public benefits, basic housing, basic health care. So I say all this because, to your point, we're not talking about policy, right? We're talking about a distorted vision of America that tries to do one thing, and that is how do we preserve the whiteness of this country? And that's what that's about.
And the whole thing started with that, didn't start, obviously, but with, as it relates to Donald Trump, he came down the elevator and talked about Mexicans in 2015 as being rapists. He talks about them as talks about immigrants as vermin. He talks about people as poisoning the blood of our nation. But he also talks about wanting more immigration from Norway and stuff like that. By the way, there's no net immigration from Norway to the United States. So you're not getting your immigrants from Norway. But it is this concept that we are building a border and a protective force to protect the vermin who poison the blood of our country from coming in.
Exactly. And I think Project 2025 isn't just about building on the Trump White House, right? I think it's also this idea that in the last 4 years, Trumpism has seen President Biden. They've seen in their face this humanitarian crisis. Yep. They've seen the great replacement theory suddenly go from being a fringe theory to being normalized. And so Project 2025 is in many ways the manifestation of that deep xenophobia, of the most vulgar aspect of this anti-immigrant sentiment. And I think we need to understand what does that mean? If Trump walks into the White House, come January, what would happen is ICE would have complete access everywhere across the country, including schools and hospitals and churches, places that have been deemed sacred spaces. You would see local law enforcement being deputized to become like ICE agents. We wouldn't
Which is currently against the law. They can't do that.
Exactly, against the law. We wouldn't just be seeing deportation centers. We would be seeing camps, literal tent cities that aren't just holding undocumented immigrants, but also children, which you pointed out. But people have to understand, Children would be held in these tent cities. To your point, TPS would be slashed. Working visas would be restricted to, in their words, just the best and the brightest. What does that mean?
Right. I don't know. Because I think there are a whole bunch of undocumented people in this city who deliver and make our food. There are a whole bunch of undocumented people who pick our produce. There are a whole bunch of undocumented people in every industry in this country.
In their eyes, the best and the brightest are European immigrants.
Right.
And when we talk about sealing the border, it's not just that we'll see the rise once again of Trump's wall. They will be institutionalizing Remain in Mexico policy, essentially completely gutting the asylum system, and once again reframing sort of what the American ethos is supposed to be all about.
Right. And if there are fixes for the asylum system,
absolutely,
including having more people in the system that can evaluate asylum seekers, can process them, and that's part of our problem. We just don't have that actually happening. There are fixes.
Yes.
You've thought about them. You've studied them. They're not in here.
What is in that book, Eileen, you do such a great job at educating us. None of that is based on facts, right? What we're seeing in Project 2025 is all rooted in fear-mongering.
Yeah.
No, it is all rooted in this idea that immigrants and migrants are criminals and they're dangerous, and in this racist narrative that they're lazy. And so you love facts, let's tell people the facts. No, immigrants are not criminals. According to Stanford University, U.S. native citizens are more likely to commit crimes than undocumented
because there's a massive disincentive to commit a crime if you're an immigrant.
Of course, but also statistically, it's just
doesn't happen.
Immigrants are also not lazy. They pay billions of dollars in taxes. I mean, you can go on and on, but the point here is they're explicitly trying to be cruel.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
And that, unfortunately, is what it is. But we need people to know this, because if you cast your ballot a certain way, this is a 180-day implementation plan from January 20th. This is not a long-term thinking about immigration. This is a plan to deport people, create camps, and do all the worst things that we do.